Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. It's your host Terry, coming to you from the Salt Lake City Prime Terminal tire shop. I don't know how to flip this thing around. I'm getting my drives replaced. So, my lowest drive was down to like 330 seconds. So I was like, yeah, I need to get these done. I was going to get them done in Springfield, but I'm like, I'm here. I'm just going to get it done. So anyway, I was doing some research. Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a sec. I was doing some research on fuel tax holidays in different states, different jurisdictions. I talked to my friends at the fuel desk at Prime, and I also, I looked at a couple of state announcements, not the actual statutes, but announcements of the statutes, as well as some news releases from IFTA. And so I wanted to share a couple of thoughts, and I'd love to get feedback on this because a lot of people have been doing this way longer than I have. A lot of people probably have done their own IFTA taxes, maybe back in the day, or, and I don't do them. I mean, I don't do my income tax, so I'm sure as hell not going to do my IFTA taxes. That's what accountants and, Prime accountants for the income tax. I learned that a long time ago, Hire professionals, because every once in a while it really, really matters. So anyway, and Prime does my fuel tax like anybody that's leasing at Prime or whatever. So let me just deal with this kind of in a couple of segments. First is just the general notion of a fuel tax holiday. So let me just say that I'm actually opposed to any fuel tax holidays. And there have even been people that have called for a federal fuel tax holiday. And here's why. First of all, prices for fuel have been historically low. And the last time we had fuel prices this high was in the 2008 timeframe. Now, the cause back then, and I mentioned it on an earlier video, is different than the cause is today. And I don't want to go back and revisit what I said about 2008, but the cause today is very simply global supply. And it's directly because of the sanctions being placed on I almost said the USSR, on Russia by a lot of countries in the developed world, namely Europe and the United States, to essentially not allow purchases of fuel from Russia, whether that's crude oil or distillates. So for our purposes, trucks use diesel fuel number one, which is referred to as a middle distillate. Okay, so it's not as distilled as gasoline, but it's a middle distillate. There is a possibility that if global production does not ramp up, in other words, to fill in that gap from the sanctions against Russia, that there could be a diesel fuel shortage. So forget about high prices for a second. We might be having an issue with supply, period, where it won't even matter how much you're willing to pay. You might not be able to get it. So that's a concern. But I think that any fuel tax holiday is counterproductive to reacting to the possibility that there could be a global shortage, especially in middle distillates like diesel fuel. That's the first reason I oppose, because when prices spike up and then government intervenes. Now, I know the argument is, well, government's intervened already because they're fuel taxes. And we could talk about the efficacy of fuel taxes, but the bottom line is that fuel taxes are what a lot of what that money is used for is roads and bridges. And we've been running a deficit on money availability for those projects for a long time. And in part, it's because we get better mileage. In fact, it's so bad in some states like Virginia that they actually came up with this notion that they should have an additional tax on people who drive super fuel efficient hybrids. So like if you owned a Prius or some other hybrid, they would actually assess you a fee every year because you get such great mileage that they don't feel like you're paying enough fuel tax, which is another way of saying you're not, even though you drive, you know, let's say the Prius owner drives, you know, 30,000 miles a year, but they're only paying taxes on about, you know, a quarter of that. And so they think we got to just tax these people more, even though they tried to be fuel efficient. I don't even know what they would do if you're driving like an all-electric car, like a Volt or a Leaf or a Tesla. And by the way, I saw some of those Rivian pickup trucks on an auto carrier yesterday going by me because he was going fast. So that's the first thing, is that it's counterproductive to the global, the fact that we might have a shortage. If you think you're going to have a shortage in something, why in the world would you lower the price, even as a governmental agency? Well, the answer is simple: politics. Okay, and let me just talk. So let me talk about Maryland, because it's a state that I'm more familiar with. You know, I went to law school there, I practiced there, I'm still a member of the bar there, and you know, there's a governor's race going on. And I also, you know, I have friends in politics in Maryland and stuff. So one of the people that's running for governor, because the current governor is Larry Hogan, and he's a middle of the road Republican, pretty popular, but he's term limited, so he's going to be leaving office. So there are a number of contenders for the Democratic nomination and then some for the Republican nomination. One of the contenders for the Democratic nomination is a guy named Peter Franchot, who's the comptroller of Maryland, and he's basically the tax dude in Maryland. And I don't like him, actually, because I don't like how he's run the office, and that's a whole nother story. But Franchot called for a 90-day suspension of the gas tax in Maryland, which is actually a misnomer. It's not a gas tax. It's technically called by statute the motor fuels tax. So it also applies to diesel fuel we put in our trucks. And so he wanted a 90-day suspension. And Maryland, I will say this, Maryland does have about a $1.6 billion surplus in the state budget. So, you know, never mind. I'm not even gonna get into the fact that it's a high, you know, people say, oh, it's a high tax state. Yeah, it is, but they also have really good schools, and there's a lot of benefit to that. And they have a surplus. So anyway, you know, some of the legislature and, you know, other people in politics in Maryland were like, well, hey, we got this surplus, let's just give a gas tax holiday. So it turns out it was only good. Franchot wanted 90 days, but he's running for governor. The governor basically said, okay, let's just do 30. Okay, doesn't mean they can't extend it. But so anyway, if you buy diesel fuel in Maryland, you're not going to pay state fuel tax, which is going to reduce the price per gallon by about $3. Or sorry, I wish it was $3. By about I think 39.7 cents. Okay, so it's noticeable, but that doesn't mean that the price isn't going to end up ultimately, you know, during this 30-day hiatus, that it's going to be ultimately just as high as it was. It might dip a little bit, but come right back up. Because remember, what's triggering this is a global shortage in crude oil and in middle distillates. Not a goal, you know, there's plenty in the ground, but it's how much people want to pump, right? And not to get too far afield here, but OPEC, you know, the oil producing and exporting countries, right? There's mostly all the oil producers in the Middle East, plus Venezuela, Nigeria, I think, and maybe a couple other countries that have huge oil supplies are part of OPEC. But there's this OPEC plus one, or OPEC plus, I should say, OPEC plus. Russia is considered to be part of OPEC plus. Now, the UAE, I mentioned this earlier, the UAE said they might consider pumping more. They decided against it, right? So that's a cartel that we got to be paying attention to, you know? And right now, they don't see the efficacy of pumping more and increasing the global supply. So just thinking about what happens when we say, oh, well, we'll call it 40 cents a gallon. 40 cents a gallon decrease in Maryland. And by the way, the only other state right this second that's doing the same thing is Georgia. Michigan is considering it. California is doing something about gas taxes, but it's not going to impact us. Okay, so let me just deal with those. So, like I said, Maryland, Georgia, kind of doing the same thing. Gas tax holiday. Michigan the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, has talked about doing it. We'll see what happens there. California, what happened was the governor wanted to do a gas tax holiday. What the legislature said, even though, you know, it's Democrat, the legislature, though, said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to just give people a $400 rebate. I actually think that's a better plan. And I'll tell you why. Because it creates knowability. And not no ability, but KNOW, ability. In other words, you can know exactly what the cost is going to be. So people in California are still going to pay gas tax like always. Truckers are still going to pay fuel tax like always. But people that live in California are going to get some relief. That's not going to do any good for, I don't think, for us. I don't know if major motor carriers like Prime and, you know, that really do a lot of business, haul a lot of stuff in and out of California, if there's going to be any movement towards maybe getting a refund at the corporate level, and if they'd share it with, you know, I don't know how that would work. It might just be a $70 bonus at Christmas time like last year. Anyway, so that's a long way of saying the first reason that I don't like the gas tax holiday is because it creates, well, first of all, it's unfair in terms of, like, you know, people from one state to another. And I'm sure that people in Pennsylvania, and so Maryland does a gas tax holiday, right? A lot of people in Pennsylvania live within a few miles of Maryland. And, you know, so I just feel like there's going to be because fuel prices are already higher in Pennsylvania because Pennsylvania has really high fuel taxes. I just feel like everybody's just going to be making a beeline for the Mason-Dixon line. And they're going to get to the very first station in Maryland and fuel up and go home. And, you know, a lot of people in PA work in Maryland too. I just don't find it very productive. And the thing is, and so here's the second reason, and this I just kind of want to segue into this. Here's the second reason that I oppose any fuel tax holiday, motor fuel tax holiday, whatever you want to call it. And it's this: nobody has changed their behavior. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, that keeps track of all of this stuff, all the global fuel supply. You can go on their website, you can see who's pumping what, what's going where, consumption by country, by region, all of this stuff, right? They have basically come out and said, if the major users of fossil fuel, well, not fossil fuel, crude oil based fuels, do not significantly cut back on consumption right this second, there's a huge chance that there will be a global shortage of fuel, middle distillates in our case. They've suggested that the United States lower speed limits across the board by 6 miles an hour. Now, you say, well, that would be dumb. Why would you lower speed from 65 to 59? Of course, you wouldn't do that. The 6 miles an hour is a number based on all of their math, right? But their point is that there's a good chance, because here's the other thing that it plays into this. The Russians produce a huge amount of diesel fuel. In fact, there was a story I read the other day where some stevedores, longshoremen, in Dublin, Ireland, who are Eastern European immigrants to Ireland, refused to unload a ship that was carrying Russian diesel fuel that came from Russia. And, the ports commissioner basically said, hey, this really hasn't hurt anybody but the people that bought the fuel, because the fuel's already been paid for, right? And so we're not going to ask them to unload it. We'll assign them to other jobs, and we'll get, I guess people from the British Isles who work at the port, or from the Philippines or whoever. We'll get them to unload the fuel. And their point was, it's not hurting the Russians. It would only hurt us because we already paid for it. But my question is it worth it to you to slow down a little bit to avoid a possibility that we can't even get diesel fuel? In other words, is driving 60 instead of 65 worth it to you if you knew that you were basically going to have a global fuel supply induced furlough at some point? Can you imagine if you're like, hey, I got this load and I'd really love to get it there on time, but I only have enough fuel to get to the next place that might have fuel in a couple of days. I mean, we really, unless you go back to the 70s, and, I was pretty young then, but, there was a time in the 1970s when there was the Arab oil embargo that you couldn't get, if your license plate ended in the number 2, you couldn't buy gas on the 3rd of the month, or the 5th of the month, or the 7th of the month. You get the picture, right? You could buy it on the 2nd, 4th, 6th, 8th, 10th. That's how it was. Most of us have, if you're my age, you haven't been driving long enough to ever have dealt with that, right? You would have had to been driving age back in like 73. And if, but I remember that, my parents were like, can we get gas today? So that's part of it. But the other part is that I haven't seen a change in behavior. I still see people zooming by me. I still see trucks zooming by me. And I was doing as fast as I could coming out here because I knew I had to spend some time in the shop. So I ran 650 miles yesterday, and I did it in about 10 and a half hours of drive time. So, I was probably averaging above 60 miles an hour during my drive time. but I felt like I needed to do that. But I really, if I had not had to be in the shop, I would have still been on my way to Salt Lake City, because I'd have driven 57 miles an hour across Wyoming. And I don't even want to hear about, oh, speed limit's 80, that's too slow, that's dangerous. Well, it's only dangerous for people that are doing 80 in a truck, I guess. That's their business. But, my business is running my business. And so, I share that because, there's a possibility that we're going to see fuel rationing in the not too distant future. But here's one more reason that I don't like the fuel tax holiday. The other day, in fact, I still have about over a quarter tank left. I bought fuel in Grand Island, and the price at the pump was $5 something, I think, or maybe $4.99. I got the fuel base price using the Prime app, $3.49. My fuel surcharge on this trip, I think, was around 54 cents. So, I was into that fuel essentially about $2.96, $2.98. I might be a little bit wrong on the numbers, but I essentially paid, let's say, $3 a gallon for fuel after everything comes out in the wash, right? Taxes are taken care of, all that's done. I can still be profitable doing that. And truthfully, like I said, if I hadn't needed to get here to get the work done, and also if I hadn't had a deadline because I need to get back to Springfield, I would have still been on my way out here. My historical average on this truck is 9.3 miles to the gallon. Now, it turns out, if you watch this video for any, or if you watch some of my other videos, that my truck actually probably doesn't run 65, even when it says it is. And, there's a lot of evidence that that's the case. But, I got to thinking about it, and I was like, you know what? I get all these awards for service. In other words, I don't show up late for places. And maybe the reason I have that historical average of that is because when I think I'm doing 65, I'm only doing 63. And when I set it at 58, when I really have a lot of time, I'm only doing 56. I'm happy about that. And, I don't feel rushed most of the time. Sometimes I do. But most of the time, I don't feel rushed. And when I see these people, like I walked into the Loves, I stayed in Green River. I walked into the Loves last night, and there was this big ass Peterbilt at the fuel pumps idling. I walked in, I went, used the bathroom for a while, you know what I'm saying. Then I went and got a soda refill, and then I went into the restaurant there, and they gave me some liquid margarine because I was just going to eat baked potatoes in my truck, or microwave potatoes, but I wanted some grease to put on them. So I waited for the lady to go in the back and get some little containers and pump the stuff in I think it's a Carl's Jr. there. And she was very nice, didn't charge me for it, but I was in there for a while. I come out, the same truck is sitting in the exact same spot. We're on a collision course with some bad happenings unless somebody caves in on sanctions or pumping more crude oil or allocating more to distillates like that we can use. So in other words, saying, we're going to make less gasoline, but that's not politically popular. Or we're going to make less home heating oil. And by the way, diesel and home heating oil are basically the same. And how stuff is allocated. So you know, we all can do our part. Now, I will say this: Americans historically very selfish, and don't freaking. Well, actually, I don't care if you blow me up because I can prove it. Americans are never like team players unless they're forced into it. And I go back to the Arab oil embargo when the national speed limit was lowered to 55. I go back to even World War II when rationing stuff was enforced. It had the force of law. It said you could buy 2 pounds of butter this a week, then that's it. You're not getting more. Now, of course, because it was, you know, something that people cared about, there was a black market for ration coupons, there was counterfeit, and all sorts of stuff on the home front. But don't let anybody tell you everybody was all on board with, like, you know, the war effort. They're on board with the war effort until they couldn't have butter on their toast 7 days a week. That's just how it is. So let's not delude ourselves as Americans that everybody's altruistic. So I'm gonna do my part, maybe not because I'm altruistic, but just because it's actually in my financial best interest. That's all I got. But anyway, I'd love to hear comments. And by the way, if any state, if you do your own IFTA reporting, I don't know if anybody that watches me does, but I did read the IFTA notifications about Maryland, and it basically said if you buy in Maryland, when you run in Maryland, it will be considered non-IFTA miles. I don't know how that's going to affect people that, let's say, bought fuel in Virginia and just transit Maryland, you know, going to PA, or people that bought fuel in Delaware, transit Maryland, going to West Virginia or something. I don't know how that's going to impact it. But anyway, stay tuned. The fuel desk really didn't have a lot of information on this. Hopefully this week, the guy that runs it, and I can't remember his name, they'll all get up to speed and everything will be cool. But I guess take advantage of it while you can. But I really think slowing down, using the tools we're given on the app, and then just saying, hey, I know what my fuel surcharge is. I'm going to use, you know, because some people are net positive on fuel because of fuel surcharge. It can be done. So anyway, I just wanted to share that, give everybody an update, talk about some of the new laws that are going into effect, and yeah, we'll just keep heading down the road at a reasonable speed, I guess. Hey, thanks for tuning in. Yeah, I'm getting my tires done. I got some other work going to get done, so I'm happy about that, and then we'll get out of here probably tomorrow night sometime. Talk to you soon. Bye.